Well, hello. Thank you for joining me. It's been a while since I've been able to come on with a true crime and legal update. But I am very happy to be here today. I've missed talking with everybody, and I'm hoping that some of you will join me this afternoon at an earlier time to discuss two pretty interesting cases that we've been following for a while, and that would be the case of Courtney Clenney out of Miami-Dade County in Florida, and also Paul Caniero from right here in Warwick County, New Jersey. Um, the Caniero case itself has been going since 2018, and Courtney Clenney a little bit shorter, let's say 2022. So thank you, mods, for coming in. I appreciate your grace as we try out this different time. It's been very difficult lately to get online at night. It's very active in real life right here at home. There's a lot of coming and goings and just not a lot of time where it is conductive to actually do a live stream without multiple interruptions or lots of background stuff going on. So I appreciate everybody's patience. Oh, hold on one second. Okay, thank you so much for your patience, everybody. I yeah, once in I definitely thank you about the beatboxing, but it was actually necessary. I had just started explaining why I hadn't been going live about how crazy it gets here when I did get a call, and I had to take it. I do have a family member in the hospital, and so things have been a little bit crazy here. Not to get into, not to get into all of the details because it's their personal business. But I do appreciate your patience in understanding. Um, so anyway, we should actually get on with what we're actually here for, which is the discussion of these two cases. Thank you everybody who joined. And again, thank you for your patience. And I'll timestamp the delay for those of you that are watching later so you don't get stuck in the big. Although the music's not bad. In one scene, just so you know, that beatboxing is actually Wrecker did that. It's called The Guilty. And there's a link that I can give you guys for that later. Oh, but I really enjoyed that little piece. He does little things for the channel, and I really like that one. I use it for all my what the ifs because I really like that. I like the beat on that a lot. So let's let's get to what we're talking about today. If you saw the thumbnail, which I'm graciously showing you again, we're going to be talking about Courtney Clenney and Paul Caniero. And I thought I thought that I would start with Clenney because like there's a lot of new information coming in that I found really interesting. There was recently a filing in the court from her attorneys in asking to do a like a physical reenactment type situation. And well, the reason that that struck my curiosity so much, and this was in the last hearing, I believe it was at the beginning of this month in August, um, it, that perhaps Courtney Clenney will be testifying. Now, one of the facts of the case is that she is going to be using that battered spouse type syndrome. Um, the legal standard, which is pretty tough. Okay. But that is what she wants to do. She filed a notice of battered spouse syndrome under Florida law. And so that's what she's using as to the justification of the claim that she threw the knife at Christian Abonsali, resulting in his death. Now, this has been hotly contested, even in the bail hearing. Um, by the expert witness who examined the body and all of the wounds and said that that 3-inch depth of the knife wound at a downward angle starting at the top of his shoulder like area down into his heart, which is what killed him, could not have been from a thrown knife. Now, if you've been following with me, we've talked about this before. They had the whole pig carcass demonstration with the expert knife thrower throwing knives at the pig carcass, and sometimes they went in and sometimes they didn't. But as we all talked about during those demonstrations, the knife never really went in at a downward angle so deep. It did go in, at times, but not in the same way as this knife wound is, as the wound is presenting. Okay, so I mean, it's going to be interesting to say the least. The fascinating part for me is that, well, in order for it to be self-defense, Courtney Clenney is going to have to take the stand, or witnesses that can help will have to take the stand to talk about abuses that Christian Abum has done to her, because she's actually claiming battered spouse syndrome. And well, from what we've seen in evidence that is coming out in reporting, and the journalists who have actually reported on these cases have shown that from the beginning of their relationship in 2020, um, it has actually been Courtney Clenney that has been the aggressor or the more volatile partner in the case. There's been multiple instances where fights have been overheard and broke up, including the day before the incident. The police were on site for a loud argument where Courtney Clenney is seen in video being very disoriented, claiming that she's trying to get him to leave and he won't leave, and that he's sneaking into closets and things like this, storage areas, in that, he's around and she's trying to get him out of the house. But she looked very um altered, so to speak. We've seen videos of altercations to where she is the aggressor, in where this rather large man, I mean, Christian Abonsali is a very fit person. Uh, Courtney Clenney, although pegged as the aggressor, is much smaller than he is. And although into fitness and everything, I'm not going to say she's weak. She seems to be very strong. But I mean, he is like twice her size. And most of the time, we see in these altercations that he is actually protecting himself and or just trying to keep her at bay, either holding her arms down, or protecting himself, or pushing her away. We don't really see any true aggression coming out of Christian Abonsali, including any of the audio tapes that we have heard. He does not sound like the aggressor. She's name calling, she is accusing, she is high pitched, aggravated, yelling, demanding, ordering, belittling, um, just basically demasking, just tearing him apart. Um, so I'm wondering how this is going to go over, when it comes to when it comes to her actually testifying. Um, uh, her history is all going to come out in this too. Now, granted, in court cases, we sometimes see more evidence out here than they actually get to present to the jury. And that's going to become a big thing when we get to the next case, when we talk about Caniero. But in Courtney Clenney's case, there's most of the evidence has still been presented. Oh, none of those videos have been excluded. The past, since she's using this defense, their past relationship is going to be full on display for the jury. But she's using battered spouse syndrome. It all gets to come in, but it only gets to come in if there's a triggering event, like we saw in Sarah Boone, which means she's going to have to take the stand and say how this occurred, in the history that laid out for it, and how she became triggered into defending herself in this situation with Christian Obosoli in April of 2022. Okay, she may definitely be on the stand, which is going to make this case very, very interesting. Now, the other thing that happened in this case as well, remember last time we spoke about Courtney Clenney. Now, you may remember, you may not, but the defense had filed a motion to have the whole thing moved out of the county because of the prosecutor stepping down and being deposed because of those emails that were on the laptop that previously had charges against the mother, the father, and Courtney for like holding back evidence and whatever from the state, which actually ended up to be a big mess for the state, because the prosecutor who that then secured that laptop actually pulled open the file that had the emails in it, and they were emails between the attorneys in the Clenneys. Okay, and I mean Courtney Clenney's attorneys in the Clenney. Now, not all of it was privileged, but the case was tossed out about this, keeping of the laptop from the state or whatever, and about all of tampering and everything. All of that was tossed out by the judge because there was no actually case here. They did turn everything over. They did try to access it. It was left behind after the investigation in the apartment. The parents secured it. She knew the password. So it's not, it could have been a shared device. It was mostly used by Christian, though, based on what was in it. But there really wasn't anything there. But long story short, there was actually compromised because of these emails between the attorneys. Not all of the evidence that was found on there, but these specific emails between the attorneys. They were trying to get the whole thing tossed out. The defense was because they said it like laid out their plans. It laid out the angles that they were going to come out. It was information that they didn't have. It was a violation of privacy, the whole 9 yards. And the judge agreed on most of it. Now, since this actual prosecutor stepped down, there were no sanctions or anything like that. He's no longer involved with the case. But the defense took it a step farther. They said, we don't believe that nobody else saw those emails. We think the whole prosecution team is tainted. The whole county is tainted. The whole prosecution for the county is tainted. We need the whole thing moved to another county, and we want a whole new prosecution team, or we want the whole thing tossed. And the judge found that very interesting, but it was good reading. But no, the judge said no. They have sufficiently brought in a new prosecutor who did not see the emails. Only one person saw the emails. There's enough buffer in the prosecution's office. This man has nothing to do with this case. Nobody's talking to him about the case. We are professionals here. These kind of things happen, but you're going to have to trust. I have faith that the prosecution team has put enough walls between the old prosecutor and the new prosecutor that there's going to be no tainting of the evidence, and there's no information was leaked back and forth, that it's not unfair or prejudicial to your case. Bollocks. Forget it. We're not moving. So everything is going forward with this prosecution team. Okay, without the first main prosecutor who stepped down, Mr. K is stepped down and away from it. But the rest of the team is going to be going forward. On that note, the judge also did us another service during that hearing. He actually set the trial date. Yes, we finally have a trial date. And that's going to be, it looks like December 1st. Okay, December 1st of, no, not 2026, of actually this year. This year, December 1st, 2025. So that I was very excited about. The other dates of key interest are that if there are plea negotiations, and everyone's kind of like up in the air about this, on whether plea negotiations are going on. It's not unusual in the beginning of a case for the prosecution to offer a plea to the defense, and they may have. And well, it started talking again because in the actual dates, October 15th, which is coming up in like 6 weeks or so, that would be the cutoff for acceptance of any plea negotiation or any plea deal that was going on. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't offer a deal later, or that plea negotiations can't start like right up until the day of trial, or even during trial. We have seen this happen. Well, the standard ones have a usual cutoff date like a few weeks before trial begins. And that cutoff date is October 15th in this case. So I'll be watching the media to see if anything is stirring up. With the fact that they are going to keep the case right there in Miami-Dade County with the prosecutors, with the evidence that has come out in regards to all of the video footage that's out here of the altercations between Christian Obonsoli and Courtney Clenney, where it does appear that she's the aggressor. This long history that they have. Like, we've only seen one side of it. Granted, I don't want to paint a picture of like total guilt here, because this is all allegedly. We only know what we have been presented out here in the media. And it's often that they will present the evidence against the perpetrator and not any of the things that actually make sense that would make them not guilty. Like, we never hear a lot about that, right? So we don't want to jump to too many conclusions on how that case will be presented, but it does look like she's going to have to take the stand. Well, based on her taking that battered spouse self-defense claim in Florida, which is difficult. We saw this with Boone. You've got to get up there and you've got to tell the history, and you've got to say what triggered you. and what went on. And so, without there being any other witnesses in the apartment that day, um, there is the altercation the day before. You know, I think that in this particular case, it actually has a little more tooth to it than Boone did. Um, you know, Boone had no altercation the day before. They had nothing going on. Her own words were saying that everything was fine that day. So for her to be triggered into this battered spouse syndrome to where she overreacted to a situation, she said it was the actual hand, coming out of the suitcase. I don't know what um, Courtney Clenney's triggering events will be. They've had multiple fights throughout the 2 years of their relationship, which started in 2020. They multiple witnesses, multiple police interference for domestic calls at the place, especially at the apartment that they were in. Neighbor complaints, the building complaints. The building security has called the police in several times. It's all been documented. Yeah. So this one's a little sticky from what we can see already out in the media for Courtney Clenney. I think it's going to be a tough one. Okay. It's all going to depend on believability also, on whether or not the jury can put faith into what she's saying and believe it. Okay. Yes, there's plenty of police altercations uh, that can back up that the situation occurred, but what do those reports say? I haven't read them yet. Do they indicate her as the aggressor? As we have seen in other police reports, where you think just because the police came, well, that's a benefit to the defendant, right? Not always. We saw in several police reports in the Boone case alone to where the police identified that it did appear that Boone was the aggressor, or it was too close to call. Now, if there are reporting like that, that doesn't go well. However, if it says that, actually Christian Abunsali is actually the aggressor, that could actually go in her favor. I can't imagine it's all negative, or why would the defense be pushing forward on it? I doubt very much they're depending only on the mercy of the jury, okay, and on her being believable and them taking her side of it in having that empathy there for her, because they, first of all, they need a lot of that, definitely, and it would take a heck of a lot of it to go actually over and above some of what we've already seen. So far, I have not seen any of that evidence being excluded. The only thing would be the emails, some of the stuff that was on the laptop, but not all of it. There still was evidence taken off that laptop that was Christian Opensali's. And I know that in the civil suit by Christian Opensali's family against Courtney for wrongful death, they also want to lay claim to that laptop and what's on it. And we'll see what happens with that. But that civil suit won't go forward until after this is all settled, which we're hoping will be settled by the end of the year without any delays. Now, this case has seen multiple delays. I mean, even on the hearings, they get scheduled from month to month to keep it updated. They keep getting, pushed and delayed and etc. But so far, everything's going through. They're not going to have a new prosecution team. The judge has definitely denied on that and put through a new trial date of December 1st. It's coming through. So the last final pretrial conference is scheduled for November 20th. And we'll have to watch that date of October 15th in this case to see if any, plea negotiations prior have been settled or whatever, and they will touch base at that hearing on the 15th. There should be another status conference like during September. There usually is one a month, so we shall see if anything new comes up, but I'll be watching to see what gets filed. But it's heating up. It's heating up. Anything that they want kicked out now as far as evidence should be showing up in motions now. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. But so that concludes Courtney Clenney. I'm just gonna check the chat really quick before we move on to the next one. Oh yeah, hey Mousy, yep. Yeah, I hate to mention Boone, but when it comes to that, you know, battered spouse syndrome defense, that's the best example because we just went through that and that was like crazy. That was definitely a crazy case. She's back to writing letters, but it's in her divorce settlement. She's writing letters now to that judge back there, and there has been a problem with Sarah Boone's appeal too. You know, um, but all right. So I don't see any questions, so I'm going to go right into the next one, which is Paul Caniero. Now, Paul Caniero. This is a murder trial for family annihilation in 2018. Paul Canero's brother's whole family. Uh, in 2018, brutal murders of brother Keith Caniero, his wife Jennifer, and their two young children in Colts Neck, New Jersey. It was a shocking case in the local community. It has drawn national attention in the beginning because of its gruesome nature, family ties, and the sordid story between the suspect and the victims. The suspect being the brother of Keith, Paul Caniero. Now, it goes back to November 20th of 2018, where there was a devastating fire in Colts Neck at the mansion of Keith Caniero. And upon arrival, they had discovered the bodies of Keith, Jennifer, and the two children. Now, Keith himself was outside of the home. Okay. He was found on the front lawn, face down, riddled with multiple gunshot wounds. So inside the home, Jennifer and their two children were discovered. They had been stabbed to death. And I do believe that Jennifer was also shot. The house was deliberately set on fire, per the arson inspectors, in an apparent attempt to destroy evidence. And later on that same day, a fire broke out coincidentally at the home of Paul Caniero, the suspect. His older brother, Keith's older brother, and it was in Ocean Township. And investigators quickly noted similarities in the timing and circumstances of the two fires, raising suspicions. Okay. Now, it took until on November 21st, Paul Caniero was arrested on the charges of aggravated arson for setting fire to his own home. Okay. Authorities believe that act was intended to create an alibi by making it appear as though Paul was also the target of a violent attack. In other words, to draw suspicion away from him in his brother's murder. But he had been charged with 4 counts of aggravated arson and other related offenses. There was a lot going on in this case. When I say other related offenses, well, the list is long. He's got 16 charges against him. Okay. But basically, they are alleging that Paul did this over financial disputes related to their joint business adventures. The brothers were in a consulting firm, Square One, and a pest control company. They also discovered that Paul, during their investigation, allegedly Paul had been embezzling funds from these businesses, and through conversations and digital evidence that they have, Paul appeared afraid that Keith was about to expose him. Some of the conversations that we have heard are taped from the inside of the house of Keith Caniero have been allowed to be admitted into evidence, although the defense did fight for it, where we can hear only one side of the conversation, which is mostly Keith just trying to get passwords out of Paul to try to find out why certain things haven't been paid, like life insurance policies and business insurance and things like that. And where was the money going to? And we have also the testimony and affidavit of the office manager, who says that, Keith was quite aware and had now the actual evidence that Paul was actually embezzling funds from the company. The prosecutors are going to use this motivation as the reason, and it's a pretty strong one. They're going to use all of this to prove state of mind and actually motive in regards to the murder. Although they don't need it, it does help a jury to understand. Now, this case is evidence, okay? There's a lot of issues with it. We've talked about this recently. The judge was doing some rulings on throwing some of the evidence out and keeping some of it in. Recently, the defense had filed to have both the ballistics and the arson expert removed. and they went through I believe it was in June, we had hearings, and in May, where all of the evidence was put through. Now, the arson went through. They had two different arson experts, and they had a little bit of a conflicting issue, as well as not as what the accelerant is, but whether the accelerant was of a certain grade, high temperature fire or a lower temperature fire, which would take longer. It was one tiny discrepancy in the two reports that led to the defense filing motions to get both of the experts tossed out. Well, they weren't. The judge went through everything. He said it was minor. It was definitely a matter of interpretation. Both of them qualified. Both of them could actually put forward how they came to their conclusions with sound science and data and etc. And so he's allowing it both. However, when it comes to the ballistics, we've got an issue, because when that expert took the stand and the judge was asked to come up with how they came to their conclusions and how they were proving their evidence, they did not set a very good foundation for their conclusions. And in the end, the judge has decided that although ballistics evidence like the gun and the bullets and all the laboratory reporting and all the match and everything is in, the actual expert being able to convey that to the jury, well, he's out, because the judge did not have confidence into how he came to his conclusions, nor could he actually come up with solid theory into how he came up with his conclusions, which is a 101 foundation for the expert witness. So lesson learned, prosecution, be careful who you hire as your expert witness. They got to be good, because this judge was not having it. And the defense won that one. Ballistic expert out. Now, it doesn't mean they can't use the gun and the bullets, which did match. And the gun was owned by Paul Caniero, and the bullets that were in the bodies did match. Now, they can still use that, but it won't be as easy to convey that information to the jury without an expert witness to lay out the whole picture for them on how it happened and blah, blah, blah. It gets a little more complicated. They will be able to bring up the lab technicians, and they will be able to bring up those that found the bullets and say that this is the type of bullet, this is the type of gun, who owned that gun, and what kind of bullets does that gun use. And the probability they will be able, if it was tested in the lab and not just by the expert. Now, sometimes the experts do their own independent testing, and that can help. Well, the lab also does fire that gun, and it will depend on how. I'm sorry. Oh, I'll be right back. One more time. Sorry about that, guys. If this isn't like evidence as to why I haven't been live, I don't know what. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry about that. Hey, Jin. I guess the ringing bell summoned Jin again, because he was here when the first time they went off also. But everything's fine. They just had to remind me about something again. But anyway, where was I with Paul Caniero? In regards to the evidence, we were going over what is actually still in and what's going to be coming out. And I believe we were talking about ballistics and how the judge has now said that the ballistic expert cannot actually testify, the prosecution's ballistic expert anyway, but they will be able to still use the gun and the bullets and etc. in any type of testing that was done by the crime lab for shooting of that, and the likelihood the gun was registered to Paul Caniero. The bullets are the type that used that gun, and the testing did show that they more than like they did come from that gun. So they will be able to present that, but not as easily as they can with an expert witness that could paint the whole picture and put it in layman's terms for a jury. It's going to be a little more technical, and it'll be up to whether the jury grasps the correlation. This is a very emotional case. It involves children and family and backstabbing and all kinds of things. That can draw on the heartstrings of a jury. Yes, they're supposed to just look at the evidence only, and they're supposed to not think about those kind of things, but they're human. Okay. There is a lot of evidence here. There's a lot of conversations between Keith and Paul, text messages that are coming in. There's going to be Apple Watch data and some data evidence that was from the video surveillance around the houses, both houses. One piece of video surveillance that we had already told you about that was kicked out was when Paul Caniero, when he said that there was a disruption in his electrical service, which was why his camera doesn't work. Well, when they searched his shed and found the DVR that actually holds Paul Caniero's videotaping of all of the stuff for his house, from his alarm system and from all the cameras, there was actually a clip of him reaching up to turn the cameras off right before this incident occurred. But that has been tossed. Now, that was really hot evidence because it proved that his story about like there being an electrical interference, and that's why there's no outside or videotape of whatever was going on when the fire occurred at his home. It did capture him coming and going from his own residence around the time, setting up a timeline on when he could go to the brother's house to do what he did in the middle of the night and then come back and set the fire here. It kind of was used to set the timeline. The only thing that has been actually removed was the little piece that they found when they went in there and found the DVR, because the warrant was not issued for actually going into that property. They tried to say, well, it was urgent because there was a fire going on at the time and we were trying to preserve evidence. However, the shed was outside of the fire zone. The fire had already been previously contained. And so the judge said, nice try, prosecution, but that's not good enough. They could have waited to the warrant. That particular piece of evidence is tossed. So there will be not like physical evidence of him actually turning off the system. However, the prosecution is still going to claim that he turned off the system, and they're going to lay that out for the jury. Okay. And see whether they believe in the fact that, well, I lost power and then my house caught on fire, or I turned off the system so I could set my house on fire. It's going to depend on how it gets presented. But that also has been tossed out. However, all the conversations between Keith and Paul are included, except the judge will be limiting them by time frame. They're not going to let them go back years. The prosecution has years of these conversations between the two of them that show that there may have been some kind of problem, but they're not going to let them go back years. They're only going to keep it to around the same time. It's also as well with the financial information. They do not want to bring in years and years and years of things that Paul Caniero may have done. But they will keep the key components in the beginning, towards the end, on how things heightened up and the things that were actually being proven at the time. Now, it's a really emotional case. From the beginning, there has been fighting between the in-laws of both Jennifer and Keith, back and forth with the settlement of the cane, accusations that the Canieros just like swooped in and tried to take everything and move everything, and perhaps were helping Paul to hide evidence and take things over. And then, of course, the in-laws that were Jennifer's parents were fighting it. Um, you know, it's just nasty all the way around. It doesn't look like anything's going to get settled anytime soon. But we are coming into jury selection on September 8th. Sorry. September 8th, jury selection will be going to trial. Now, in New Jersey, we don't really get a lot of live feed of trials or anything like that. Sometimes they will allow some reporting and we will get it after the fact. Whatever I do get as far as live feed, I will show, but we'll be reporting on this case from day one, keeping up to date. Um, because it just needs to be finished. I mean, it's since 2018. They tried to change the venue. The judge said no. They tried to change the venue, saying that like because he was so hated. Yes, in 2018 when it happened, there were plenty of conversations going on about how distasteful this was, how shocked people were, how they didn't like Paul, yada yada yada, and it looked really bad in the beginning. Well, since then, there's been hardly anything. There's very little reporting going on it, and there's not this big slam campaign out there on the socials against Paul Caniero that would have to make it so that you cannot find a jury. It's a really big county. There's a large jury pool to pick from. It was, it was mostly localized to Colts Neck, where the family was very popular. Yes, Keith Caniero and his wife were very popular, very well loved in the area, and so of course there was a lot of backslide, but not to the point of prejudicial that they won't be able to get an unbiased jury. At least that's what the judge ruled. And I was happy to see that. The other thing that was really important is this case is the Stryax DNA testing, which actually took small parts of DNA that were from mixed contributors. And there was a whole big hearing about that went on for quite some time because it was new technology. And this will be the first case that is allowed in New Jersey. But it was put forward. The judge did say that they could use it. And that is pretty damning to Paul Caniero because it's a spot on his genes that has his DNA and one of the children's in it. A blood DNA. That's going to be really hard to get rid of. Found in his basement in clothes that he was wearing, his own clothes, blood spot found in his own basement of the home he tried to burn down. Oh, and by the way, when his home, Paul Canero's home, was set on fire, his wife and children were inside. And he had things in his car ready to leave, according to the prosecution and the indictment. That, to me, just was so evil. Not only did he annihilate his brother's family, and then he just, to set the stage that everybody was being targeted, he left his family at risk. Although they were safe, they all got out. He left them at risk because it would look better that he was being targeted also. A bit insane. Yeah. I don't know. This case to me is local and very, like, I remember when it happened and it was so traumatizing, such a wonderful family's children treated the way they were inside that house. Really bad. And as it unfolded, people became more and more shocked. But we have to go by the evidence. And this Judge Lamo, that I have up here, he's being very fair. One of the top judges here in New Jersey. And he is really making sure that when and if Paul Caniero is convicted, it won't be very much left there to appeal. He's got an excellent defense team. He always did have good defense lawyers, but Monica Massillon took over a few months back when there were some changes in the defense attorney's offices, and people were getting moved around. And she's done a bang-up job of addressing some of the evidence to date as we get closer and closer to trial. And they've thrown everything they can at the wall, and specifically in regards to individual pieces they tried to get of evidence. They tried to get the financial evidence tossed out. They tried to get a lot of the history tossed out. They weren't successful with everything, but getting that ballistics expert tossed out was a win, a definite win for them. Getting that video of him turning off the DVR system to record around his home. Getting that tossed was a great big win too. They are actually putting the prosecution's team and their evidence through its paces with a fine-tooth comb in doing an excellent job. They didn't win their change of venue, of course, or some of the other evidence, but they have got it narrowed down in regards to the messages that the jury will hear, the text messages and emails back and forth between the two brothers, what they will hear, and also, the timeline of witnesses in regards to the behavior of Paul Caniero and in regards to the motive in his state of mind. So in a way, that was a half win, because if they were allowed to go back, Paul Caniero not being very liked by many people, if they were able to go back farther, they could definitely build quite the prejudicial case against his character. So having it limited to the specifics of the case and the incident in general, that would have sparked him to do what he did, the immediate reason, why he felt so threatened at the time that he needed to remove his brother from the situation, because he was financially threatened and etc. Limiting to that is less prejudicial and relevant to the case. Going back even farther just makes it more and more like a stack up against the defendant, which judges try to keep in balance, and they're doing a good job. He's doing a good job of that. I'm really impressed with this judge, especially with all the information he had to take in about the new DNA test technology from the company out of New Zealand, and he had to listen to tons of experts and talk about very, very technical things. He did a really good job. I'm glad he allowed the technology because it's fascinating. And there has been a lot of movement throughout the United States in regards to new technology in DNA testing. We've got cases in New York that are going on right now, the Rex Harriman case, to where new technology is being asked to be introduced into the court system in New York for the first time in regards to genotype testing on older type evidence that doesn't have root hair, really old decaying DNA samples, to where they're trying to, bring them down to the genome and actually be able to identify what family sources they came from. That is being hotly contested currently, and we'll be talking about that next week because that judge is going to be giving an order on that very shortly. So that so far is my update on Paul Caniero. If you guys don't have any other questions, as I said, we are going into jury selection next week, the 8th, and we should then on to trial once that jury is seated. Now that we know the venue is staying right where it is, we have some of the evidence eliminated. They still have plenty of evidence against him: financial, DNA, ballistics, motive, the arson. They have actual evidence of him setting the arson, setting the fires. They have financial evidence of. And on that, you know what, guys? I'm just going to end up having to call it. Okay. So let's just say goodnight, and I'll talk to you all soon.